Planning Board meeting on Tuesday, January 9th will come to order. Our sole topic of discussion tonight are the public hearings, the three public hearings for Articles 2, 4, and 5 for the special town meeting zoning articles. What I'd like to do is to make a few very short introductory remarks, and then I'm going to ask the planning director to provide a broader overview of what is in the proposed bylaw, at least Articles 4 and 5. And then I will take some preliminary questions from the board, even though we've obviously talked about this many times, and then we'll take citizen input in terms of it. So that's the process that will follow. We'd ask people to be reasonably brief when they speak, 3 to 5 minutes max, and to be sort of polite and cordial. If you have questions, we'll try to get answers to questions. So. In terms of the process we're following, and Gene, I want to ask you one question before we start. On Article 2, we'll probably want to ask the proponent to explain that as part of the process. So why don't we, after you get done, we'll have that person speak. The Articles 4 and 5, I just wanted to make some general comments before we start to provide some context on those articles. Is that if people remember at the town meeting last May, the vote of the planning board was to recommend unfavorable action on the proposal that existed at that time. And one of the major reasons why the planning board did that is they said that we believed that the proposal was, at that time, was premature, incomplete, and didn't have the proper protections for the town interest in it. So as a result of that, the planning board went back, and basically every meeting we've had since then, we've tried to address the issue of a comprehensive zoning bylaw that addresses the proposed large-scale use of a cultivation facility in North Andover. That's what you're going to see tonight in terms of Articles 4 and 5. It's a result of really 6 months of work by the board, by town council, and by the planning director, and the two of whom have put in a yeoman's effort, really, in terms of the work product that they put into it. When you ask questions tonight, I think there's probably 2 filters that you should use. Is one, if you are generally in favor of this type of use, large-scale use, does the bylaw provide adequate protection to the town in terms of a regulatory perspective? The other view is that you may not believe that this use is an appropriate use for the town, that the benefits outweigh the costs. So if you want to raise that as a question or issue, you're welcome to do that as well. So with that as sort of backdrop, Gene, do you want to provide an overview?
So as you said, for Article 2 is a citizen petition that would serve to prohibit non-medical marijuana, and I would ask the proponent to provide an overview for that. For Article 4 is to amend the Town of North Andover zoning bylaw to replace Section 813, which was implemented last year as a temporary moratorium on recreational marijuana establishments. And that would be replaced with, again, Section 813 Marijuana Overlay District. So to further explain this, and it's somewhat of a comprehensive bylaw, so I do have several bullets that I just want to explain to everybody. And then, as John said, when you have any type of question related to these, we can expand more. So this article creates a marijuana overlay district to provide for the citing of specific allowed marijuana uses which relate to or involve marijuana as regulated by Mass General Law, and repeal zoning bylaw 813, temporary moratorium on recreational marijuana establishments and retailers. The marijuana overlay district bylaw combines the content of the medical marijuana bylaw that exists today and the site plan review bylaw with the new provisions for commercial marijuana. The prohibited uses are consistent with what the Board of Selectmen voted for, thus no retail and no craft marijuana cultivator cooperatives. The allowed siting is consistent with the medical marijuana overlay district, but extends it to 1600 Osgood Street. However, 1600 Osgood Street is restricted from selling or dispensing either medical or recreational marijuana. The bylaw allows for outside peer review consulting for a number of aspects, such as community impact, water usage, security measures, transfer of marijuana policy, waste management, energy and environmental standards, odor analysis, etc. The bylaw provides for a linkage between cultivation space and research space. And as an alternative to tiering cultivation square footage, bond requirements and a construction management plan is required to ensure designated milestones are met. Non-compliance with the timing or sequence in the plan shall stay any further construction of the project or operation of the use until the project is brought into compliance with the plan. So those are just kind of the high-level overview of what went into the construction of the bylaw. Article 5 simply amends the town zoning map to include the marijuana overlay district. And again, as described, that would be where the existing medical overlay district is onto 1600 Osgood Street.
Good. Will you have the text of the bylaw that you can put
Yep,
up on the
I do.
screen? We should probably do that.
Do you want to
So,
start with Article 2 or 4?
let me ask the pleasure of the board. How would you like to do this? Do you have any threshold questions in terms of the process before we start?
I just had a question. I didn't get to watch the board of selectmen meeting last night. Was there anything that happened there that influenced changes where we are today? I know the warrant articles were.
I mean, there was a pretty robust discussion, wouldn't you say? I think many of the people that were last night are here tonight, although I do see a bunch of different faces as well. I think there was, what I would say is this, for last night's meeting, given the population of people, it was more people that spoke against it than spoke for it. That's not necessarily a reflection of anything other than who was there last night, but most of the comments last night were opposed.
Did they said anything? I guess just more process.
What I would say is, I do think we have to come back and address the linkage of the R&D to the cultivation and how we do that. That was one of the topics that came up. There was a question related to retail. Is a delivery service retail? That was something else that came up. There were questions about some of the benefits that would accrue to it and how much incremental tax revenue would have, but that gets deep into assessor talk, and it's probably outside of scope for us, but that was one of the things that did come up.
And I would just say that in terms of the process that the planning board is going to undertake, in terms of holding this public hearing on the zoning articles, there was nothing that would change that process. That process is still in place.
Right, and that's a good point. Is I did mention last night that the hearing is going to be open. This hearing is tonight, next week, and the following week, and we'll probably render a recommendation at the third meeting, but people will have multiple chances, and everybody felt pretty good about that.
I think people can get up and really, I mean, it's a public hearing, so I encourage everyone to kind of give their opinions. I think what's most useful for me is commentary about land use, rather than pro and con about, marijuana, which if you want to discuss that, that's great. But to me, it's, do we have a bylaw that really addresses this as from a land use perspective? Have we missed something in terms of our regulations, in terms of, we've put in stuff about water and odor? Is there something that we've missed or that should be, or that people have questions about? That's would be helpful for me.
I think you're right. I think that is one of the primary filters, but I think it's fair also for an individual to say that the allowed use that we're permitting is not something they think is appropriate for the town, but they shouldn't filibuster about that, but they should make that point clearly and fairly, so.
I would think the only other thing to add is that the Board of Selectmen did vote on a recommendation with regard to Article 2, and that was an unfavorable action. So their recommendation on Article 2 was unfavorable action.
Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
So with that as a backdrop, what I'd like to do is to allow the proponents of Article 2 to get up and give a brief summary of what they're proposing and why. And I don't know if, I know Mrs. Wakeman was one of the people involved, but I didn't know if there's anybody else here that is in position to speak on behalf of Article 2. Is there?
I did not sponsor the article, I didn't sign it, but Unfortunately, as you guys got the letter from Wendy Wakeman that she was unable to attend, and Charles Salisbury, oh, there he is. So I'm not really prepared for this. But Article 2 is a ban on recreational marijuana. If you guys received your Eagle Tribune tonight, Haverhill has just added their list to ban recreational marijuana because of the Attorney General, U.S. State Attorney General and the U.S. Ruling on the medical enforcing marijuana. So I would ask that you guys consider that town meeting by referendum at the ballot voted down 47 to 53 to have recreational marijuana, and that you guys make a favorable action for Article 2.
Okay, so with that as backdrop, anybody that would like to comment on any of the 3 articles or ask questions on any of the 3 articles, if you can come up, identify yourself for the record, and see.
Hi there. Ed Lynch, 137 Haymeadow. Thank you guys, first of all, because I think what I have learned in a number of meetings here is that everybody's put a lot of time and effort into this. Where my questions have been based to all of you is that I still find that everybody that comes to me with what does this really mean for us is still really confused. And the amendments and bylaws and the warrant and all of that, you can read it like that, and honestly, still people are like, I still don't understand what that means. So the question lies in how do you guys simplify if this, then that? And if it is a no vote, then it means this for the town. If it's a yes vote, it means this for the town. To a point where the public really can make an educated decision. And so I would actually offer an idea, which I offered last week, which is, what if we created this top 10 frequently asked questions, and it's co-authored by you guys and the proponents, and it just simplifies this down into if this, then that. Is that something that, I mean, again,
well, I mean, our role is a little bit different, but I'll fundamentally sort of try to put the question in perspective. This is a bylaw that is proposed to regulate a large-scale commercial marijuana property. If you believe that use of a large-scale commercial marijuana property is appropriate and the benefits exceed the costs, you should vote yes for it, assuming you like all the individual pieces of the language. If you believe that the town should not have this use, you should vote against it. That's
so if I vote yes to this, there will still be the option and potential of a medical dispensary in our town. Is that correct?
if you vote yes.
So let's just say this, we vote this in, and the research piece and growing is going to happen. There will still be an opportunity for a medical dispensary in our town.
So, yes, the short answer is yes.
Excellent.
What we're voting on, what the town will be voting on the special town meeting is a zoning article. I just want that to be
Right.
a zoning article. So that means that certain uses are allowed or not allowed in certain areas, certain properties.
Right.
Okay. So if a vote is yes, that means that in the areas in the map, a medical marijuana establishment could go there.
Right.
A commercial establishment for manufacturing, for cultivation, for research can go in those. And I feel like I'm missing one. Oh, independent laboratory, an independent testing laboratory. Those are all allowed to be there.
So a yes vote would allow those things to happen.
Potentially. It means that they could go there based on land use. They would have to come back to this
Sure.
board. Well, I think, but you may understand this, but I think it's for everyone. They would have to come back, any use that would have to come back to this board to get a special permit, would have to meet all the criteria laid out in the bylaw.
Okay.
So the yes vote would allow someone in the door, and then they'd have to come back to get a special permit, which is another vote.
But a yes vote would also eliminate the opportunity for recreational sales in our town. So there would be no recreational dispensary whether you vote yes or you vote no, there's not going to be a recreational dispensary in our town. Is that correct?
Retail?
Retail, recreation, whatever.
So
Yeah.
that's based, and unless this were amended, that's correct. As of what's on before.
Right.
Right now, yes.
So a yes or a no vote, no matter what, there is no retail dispensary in our town.
That's correct.
That is probably the biggest answer that I could possibly need. The other question I have,
Can I just want to
Yes.
interrupt. I just want to make sure that one thing is clear still, is so right now, currently, there is a medical marijuana overlay district.
correct, since 15.
Right, and so that exists.
Correct.
And so this vote on this particular zoning bylaw will not affect that.
Correct.
So when you ask, does this bylaw allow a medical marijuana establishment to go in, you already have that
Right.
here. And I just want to make sure that everybody
Right,
understands
I just
that-
think
that
people are
that
confused
exists.
about the yes and the no vote and what actually is going to happen or
The
not
change,
happen.
right.
The other thing that I think is, I know you don't have the answer, but I want to pose this as something that a lot of people are concerned about and have an issue with, when it's really difficult to have the answer for this is, how much money do we anticipate is being created for the town incrementally because of this project? And how will that money be spent? Now, I know that the answer for that second part of that is not there. But a lot of people are like, well, we should know what we're going to do. It should go towards education. Well, it's not realistic. But I pose that as just a comment that that is something that is going to come to fruition at some point in this process, because it is important. It's a lot of money, and I think people are concerned about that.
Well, that was one of the major topics of conversation at the selectmen's meeting last night in
Oh, good.
two
I
respects.
didn't get to go.
First of all, there's probably two pieces to what we're talking about. It's the concept of a host agreement, which is done between an applicant for a project and the town, and particularly in a large-scale development. It's the terms of how it's set up and structured are very complex and very nuanced, but it's basically the town manager and the Board of Selectmen, that's all within their auspice to do.
Right.
Basically, the town manager, with the direction of the selectmen, would negotiate that agreement, and that they would ratify that, and that would give the town a certain amount of money based on
Right.
what is negotiated, but it hasn't been done yet. The other piece of it is, well, what is the impact on real estate taxes, real estate revenue, and so forth? And that's kind of, in some respects, hard to do because you don't know the value, complete value of all of the investment that's going to be made in the property. You don't know exactly what the Board of Assessors are going to, how they're going to assess that value, how it's going to phase in over time, and so forth.
It honestly is a huge issue. because-
You're right, it is a huge issue.
But nobody knows.
It's not something that is predominantly within the purview of the planning
Right.
board. This is where you judge for yourself whether you believe what the applicant has said, or whether, you would like to see some spreadsheets that run it out under 5 or 6 different scenarios, and whether you believe it or not.
Right.
But we can't,
Right.
it's not within our control to demand that or to advocate that.
So back to my first point, is there an opportunity to co-author some type of top 10 frequently asked questions about this bylaw warrant
Well, I mean, I
topic?
think what we might be able to do, and what we might consider doing, is we could put together a primer on the zoning part of it, but for the part of it that's public policy, that do you think the use of this facility is proper for the town?
No.
That's not something that we
No,
would.
I'm more focused on just the warrant, and it'll break down the warrant into a very simple a simple
Well, I mean,
format.
what do people think? Simple summarization is probably not a bad.
I actually think that's a great
Yeah.
idea.
I do too.
This thing is dense.
Yeah,
It's
it
hard to
is,
read.
yeah.
It's a lot of pages and it is.
And we're around it all the time, so
Yeah.
we assume everybody else knows it
A lot of
the way
legal
we do.
language.
Well, I
Yeah.
think to Peter's point last week, and this gentleman, I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Ed, thanks.
The if this, then that, do voters realize exactly what they're voting on? If they vote negatively on one article, positively on another, or vice versa, what does that action mean for the?
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's an important distinction. I think a primer on what's in the warrants is one thing, because, as you say, Jen, it's very dense. But I think it should be more than summarizing the content. I think it would be very helpful if it translated, as you were suggesting, a yes vote means, a no vote means, and there's only 3 articles.
So similar to like the ballot, when we get a ballot initiative on the state election,
Yes.
there's a summary that says, if you vote for this, it means this, if you vote for this, it
Yeah.
means
I
this.
Some of the language is
think it's a great
backwards.
What
great
can
idea.
we do,
So,
what are we allowed to do? Because the warrant's
So-
been set, right?
Right. So the only thing that I'm thinking is you have, after the public hearing process, you have an opportunity, you're going to issue a planning board report and a
Yeah.
recommendation. So within that, provided, so I can see it could be very simple. This gives, this allows a special permit, just sort of that basic, as opposed to getting into the details. If you did something like that in the planning board report along with your recommendation, that may be proper. But I think that's as far as you would go with that. In terms of what the planning board's role is.
But if we were just to say, a yes vote means, you can have a special permit, I think to us, we understand what that means, but I think to really answer, I think that's what you just were suggesting. I think it has to go beyond an opportunity for a special permit. It has to explain what that means, without the jargon, in just plain language. If
I think-
you
So
vote
I
yes,
guess, I think it's certainly an opportunity to undertake.
and see
But I
what-
would just want to make sure that what you do in terms of your summary is consistent with what it actually says. But other than that, I think that
Right.
within the planning board report, it's completely an
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah, as long as everybody's
I- I-
comfortable with
I
it.
I think we have
there's
to
a
be very
consensus
careful that it's balanced.
Yeah, that, I
I
think we
agree
should
with
take
that.
that as an action. Let's do it. I agree.
Great.
Let's move on.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think your comments are very well taken.
Thank
no, and
Appreciate
can
it.
I also say, Mr. Lynch, if you have a list of questions, because you've come here now a couple of times in the
Yeah.
past with this recommendation, I think if you have specific questions that you think would be helpful to people, we'd certainly appreciate hearing those from you.
Absolutely.
And considering
Yeah.
including those.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, Charles Salisbury. I'm sorry I wasn't here at the beginning of the meeting, and I understand there may have been some confusion about.
Well, you
The
had a
impetus behind this?
stand-in, but if you wanted to give a more complete, we wanted to give the applicant for Article 2 a chance to speak fully about the logic and rationale of what they were proposing. And Ms. Rudinsky spoke briefly, but, if you want to add, basically give a broad overview.
Without benefit of having heard what she said, I'll try not to repeat her. I think it's worth noting where this came from. This bylaw was essentially lifted from the town of North Reading's bylaw that was passed by their Springtown meeting in 2017. And it has been done by a number of other towns as well. In fact, in North Reading, it was put forward by the planning board. The planning board authored it, put it on the warrant, and supported it and passed it. That happened also last spring in Wakefield, in Linfield, in many other towns which I think are similar in makeup to North Andover. And what it does is not get in the way of medical marijuana, which was already passed in 2012 and for which you've already developed a set of regulations to control dispensaries and other things in this community. But it does say, as far as non-medicinal marijuana is concerned, the law passed at the November 2016 election allows for use, but allows local options to say that no facilities, no business facilities involved with other than medicinal marijuana are allowed within the town. And since that time, there have been some 30 towns that have done that. And the list keeps going. Going around us, Methuen, Lawrence, the night before our town meeting, presumably Andover, are all doing the same thing. And it's all being done with the support of their planning boards. It's a little strange to be here defending it as a citizen for something that the planning board didn't choose to do, or perhaps the planning board doesn't think that North Andover needs to be as much of a community as the other towns that are protecting themselves. Does that help?
Ask a question. So I can understand that you're kind of the position from a general bylaw. If you're against the use of commercial marijuana, then I think that, I mean, whether I disagree or agree doesn't really matter. That makes sense as a general bylaw, but from a land use perspective, it doesn't make sense to me from a planning board perspective, because I don't see the difference from land use if you're growing for medical or you're growing for commercial. From a land use perspective, what's the difference?
It's talking about establishments, and in fact, the process was recommended by the Attorney General.
I understand, but I'm saying, you asked why the planning board wouldn't be recommending it.
Yeah.
And my rhetorical answer is that from a land use perspective, to me, what you're growing, where it ultimately goes, doesn't matter. From a policy perspective, I see the argument, and I think that that's why there's a general bylaw, and that to me makes sense. From a planning perspective, it doesn't really make sense for me to would say that would be a planning board role to say that particular use is not allowed when other uses for medical would be allowed. I don't see the difference.
Well, I would hope that.
See, I'm not sure I agree, because, you know, we've come up with this bylaw, but I think you could take a perfectly logical position that if we are going to allow large commercial cultivation of marijuana, this is the bylaw you want. But that, even despite that, this is not a use that you want. That a large-scale commercial marijuana is not a land use that's appropriate for North Andover. That's partly public policy, but it's partly zoning, because you're asking, the bylaw allows that facility of that scale to be an allowed use in the town.
But it seems like, at least from the perspective of Article 2, that would be allowed the same size with medical. That's where my issue is. If the only difference is medical versus commercial, then from land use, why does it matter what you're actually growing for? If it's the size, if you don't like something that's 500,000 square feet or bigger, no matter what it is, I understand that too. Yeah. That makes sense to me. But the distinction between medical versus commercial, I just don't see how, if you're using it, at least I haven't heard yet, if you're using it in terms of how things are made or processed, that there's any difference. So that's why.
But I think what the net effect of this proposed bylaw is, it just takes us back to the status quo ante of the medical bylaw still exists, I think. And that's, I think, really what the intent of the proponent is. I'm not sure. I haven't,
it seemed that, at least from Mr. Salisbury's statement, is that the question is why isn't the planning board? And for me, and I don't speak for everyone on the planning board, for me, that's why it's not a planning.
I understand.
Why it's not a land use issue, it's a general bylaw issue, at least for me.
So
I'd ask the rhetorical.
I appreciate the perspective, and I think you're more learned on this topic than I am. But when I read the introduction to the zoning bylaws, the very first, purpose, there's 11. The very first one is encouraging the most appropriate use of land. So why couldn't, just to, contrast your argument, why couldn't that be type of use as well in terms of inaction by the planning board?
I'm not saying, I don't think it couldn't, I guess I haven't heard a distinction yet that really rings true for me, where how you're using the land is different for producing medical or testing medical or manufacturing medical versus producing, manufacturing, or cultivating commercial. The use, how you do things literally seems to be the same.
Yeah.
You may not like where it ultimately winds up, and that seems to be the difference of how the product is used. Yeah. But I'm not sure that from a land use perspective, I mean, I guess your point may be, well, would we want a firearms manufacturing facility or a tobacco manufacturing facility or a brewery? I mean, where do we draw the line? I'm not sure. Right. And we do kind of consider those things. I agree. But if it's the same product and it's just used a different way at the end, for me, that doesn't.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I sort of don't want my silence to be interpreted as that I
Not saying that everyone
necessarily
agrees.
agree.
Okay.
Right.
So, good.
I guess I'd ask one more question, too. I assume that you folks belong to some state association of planning boards that you see from time to time and discuss and compare notes and war stories with other communities and what those planning boards are doing. And I would expect that this is a hot topic for such a group to get together and talk about.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your experiences and what you see in other towns and why we're different?
Well, I think I'd probably defer to the planning director, because that goes more along with the professional staff than it is with the individual board members.
Isn't there an association of planning board?
Yeah, there is.
Okay. Do you belong?
What we do as a town, but I mean, you know, I don't regularly go to
Sorry.
meetings or other members.
I don't mean to be inquisitory, but it just seems
Yeah.
that the kinds of questions and the question about differences
Yeah.
between use rather than land is a valid one. And I would hope that that would be the kind of stuff that would be discussed at that kind of a session of planning boards in multiple different communities, trying to deal with a statewide issue.
So we have been to conferences. The Merrimack Valley Planning Commission has planning meetings once a month, and we have discussed what towns are doing there. We have researched other bylaws that were put into place, and they were in one of the meeting packets early on in this discussion. So, yes, I mean, in terms of researching what other towns are doing, we have.
I guess my question is, what have you learned from talking to other towns about how they're dealing with this issue? And do you think we are an anomaly?
I think,
No.
like you said, there have been towns that have just kind of banned the use of commercial marijuana. I think we may be one of the first to kind of go through this really comprehensive bylaw.
I would agree.
You know, I know the city that I was working for as an attorney is in the process, but kind of further behind. So I think this is the process that every town's going through. They're having people come out and talk about what they like and what they don't like. We're in a somewhat different position with the actual project kind of already in the mind of an applicant. So I think we're different in that regard, but I think every city and town in Massachusetts is dealing with this in some regard, in the same fashion that we are.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
From what I heard from you, this article is put forth because a lot of surrounding towns are doing it. But getting more to the problem, obviously this is put forth because you and the proponents are looking to solve a potential problem or a problem. Can you describe what that is in your mind?
I think it's taking advantage of the law that was passed in November of 2016 by the voters that says that there is local option control, and it specifies what that local option can be. And I happen to think North Andover is a community that would benefit from using that option that was made available to it to avoid all the issues that might happen as a result of having passed that particular article. It does not prevent use, it does not prevent keeping, it does not prevent individual growing, but it does allow the town to say that we do not need any commercial establishment. We didn't before the election, and we shouldn't after, was kind of the view.
What are some of the potential problems you see with commercial activity within the town?
I don't think that marijuana businesses particularly help the reputation of the town in the same way that gambling casinos don't. I think the last time I was here, I talked about the village of Foxwoods down in Connecticut, who I think thought they were getting a very good deal when they got their large casino that drags in people from all of New England. And yet, if you look around Foxwoods, it's not a community that people want to move into. North Andover has benefited by being a very nice location surrounding an area that generates lots of fresh students out of good schools, raising families, starting businesses, doing the kinds of things that make this North Andover a place to live. I don't think they would choose the pot center of New England as being the place to do that, and they'll go to some of these other towns instead. And I think that hurts.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andrew Furman. I'm a resident at 5 Crossbow Lane. John, I think a lot of my questions you answered in your opening statements. I really appreciate that. I guess my first comment would be, as regards to Article 2, if the impetus for Article 2 is that 30 other towns in the Commonwealth have taken that action, and towns like North Reading have taken that action, I would ask that the reason we're here is we have a property that has been vacant for a long time. We have a very real potential for that property to go into use. That's why we're here today. So I would ask that you take unfavorable action on Article 2 if the impetus for Article 2 is based on 30 other towns in the Commonwealth and towns like North Reading. We have a property, a land use that we are proposing for this that is identified now. I believe there are over 350 communities in the Commonwealth, and if 30 have taken that action, again, I would ask that you take that into consideration and take unfavorable action on Article 2. John, I mentioned that you answered a lot of my questions, but I think it's important to note I've been following your action for the better part of the year. I get all of your agendas, your meeting minutes. I've attended a few of your meetings over the last couple of months. I believe you undertook this process, this board undertook this process back in late summer. I believe there was a tour of the facility in September. I believe, according to the minutes and the agendas that I've read, that you've continually met with the board or the project, the folks that are suggesting the project and recommending it. Is that the case?
Yeah, so I want to be very clear. It's totally open, totally transparent, zero private conversations with anybody. We've talked to anybody that's willing to come to our meetings to listen to talk about this, so.
Fantastic. So I'd like to thank you, this board, as well as the Board of Selectmen, for taking that time and for the due diligence that you've put into this work. If I recall, and I was at town meeting and I did vote at town meeting, I was there. If I recall, the reason for the unfavorable action, and I believe you commented on it, was because there was a feeling or notion that there was not a comprehensive plan with due diligence. I hope that coming here and the work that has been done over the last 6 months, has that been presented to you?
Well, I mean, I think what we've ended up with is we've obviously gone through a lot of due diligence, and I think the intent, and I think other people can speak about this, is that it is a bylaw that addresses large-scale commercial use, and it's a good regulatory process. But again, I think the threshold question still becomes, do you believe large-scale commercial use is appropriate in the town? If you do, this is a good bylaw. If you don't, it's not a good bylaw because
Right.
it allows a use you don't like. So,
But if one of the reasons in a lot of voters, and I believe, again, going back to your opening statements as well, I don't mean to put you on the spot, I want to understand the whole collaboration in the whole process. And I believe the unfavorable action at town meeting was one, that we were rushing this, there wasn't a plan. My sense over reading your minutes and your agenda is that we are no longer rushing this. There has been thoughtful consideration. There has been due diligence. I just want to make sure I understand that.
So I'm going to try to answer your question without actually answering your question.
Sure.
So I wasn't on the planning board last year when this came up. I can say that for me, my question, when we've had, 6, 7 months of meetings, and whenever we've had questions for the applicant, I think we've got answers.
Fantastic.
We
Okay.
may sometimes disagree with the value of those answers or what that means, but I think we've gone over, I think they at least heard the concerns that the town had in terms of, water use, odor use, electrical, and if people have other concerns, I mean, that's one of the reasons we're here today is to air those out.
Right.
But at least from my perspective, we've gone through as many of the things we could think of that could be concerns, and they've been discussed. Now, people can have different opinions about what that means, but I at least think those were discussed, where my sense was the last time they were not adequately discussed.
Thank you. That
If I could
answers
add
my
to
question,
that,
yep.
And I also was not on the planning board as of the last town meeting. I've been appointed since then. I agree with what Etan just said. We've had a very robust dialogue with the applicant and asked a lot of hard questions and gotten a lot of information from them. But I'd also add that we have also, as a board, done diligence outside of those conversations with the applicant. We have taken the time and we've really leaned hard on staff, on the planning staff and on town council who've been phenomenal to get us examples of how is this being done in Colorado? What are examples of different towns? How have they done this? How have they regulated it? What are the problems that they're seeing, and how do we prevent that or try to correct for that or make sure it doesn't happen here if we allow this? And so we have done a lot of work in sort of surveying where this has already happened in the country and trying to figure out best practices, problems that have happened, how we can alleviate that. And that hasn't just been in a dialogue with the applicant. We've taken that and we've asked the applicant hard questions based on that information. But what I would say is that I think this has been on our agendas, and correct me if I'm wrong, probably since June?
Every single meeting
Every
since
single meeting.
basically, maybe one meeting after town meeting, we didn't do it.
Yeah,
and then
right, that was the meeting I wasn't, that I was appointed at, and I was like, this is a breeze, and then this came in. But I
Welcome
would say-
aboard. And thank you.
But I would say that I feel very confident in our process and that we have not only pushed the applicant very hard, listened to their experts, toured the facility, seen what their particular plan is, but we've also looked elsewhere and beyond the scope of that and taken that and pushed them even harder. So I think that in terms of diligence, as I said, I wasn't involved in the process before, but I'm absolutely happy to say, and I'm looking forward to hearing what other people have to say about this now, but I'm confident that when we get to the special town meeting that I can stand there and say, we have had a good process on this and we've opened every door we can think of to look at this and to try to craft a good bylaw.
Okay, thank you, because that's important, because I think there were a couple of themes, and I have questions on the two other themes but I picked up at a town meeting that the unfavorable action in the no vote at town meeting was based on 3 areas, and one of them was that there wasn't this process. I think some of the others.
Can I interrupt? I just wanted to pick on Jane for a moment. I'm sorry, you kept saying applicant, and
Oh, sorry.
I just
you're
want to
not an
make sure
applicant.
that for those that may be watching, that the Article 4 anyway, that's something that the planning board has been working on with town council, with Jean, planning director, that this is not something that the owners of 16 Osgood have put forth.
Great.
This is the town's bylaw put together by this board here.
Yes, no,
So
that's
I also
a great
want to,
point.
oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, and I just wanted to say I completely agree. This was something that we drafted. We had input and received comments from them, but this is our work. This is town council's work.
So on the topic of due diligence, I would agree with what others have said, that the process used with this draft bylaw was more thorough than what we were able to do in the spring. But I would also add that, at least from my perspective, there's another important element of due diligence beyond drafting the contents of the bylaw. And this board has commented repeatedly on that other aspect of due diligence, which was carefully and thoroughly engaging the town so that the residents had a full opportunity to understand what is involved in this bylaw and potential uses under the bylaw. And I think if you look at the record, you'll see that the board commented multiple times on the importance of a very thorough public outreach. At least I consider that part of the important due diligence. And we had the due diligence through the fall with drafting of the bylaw, but what at least caught me by surprise was the amount of time that at least I expected to have between now and the town meeting was dramatically cut short by the application for a special town meeting. And we have reacted to that because we have no choice. The special town meeting and the timing is something that's imposed on us. And I think this board has reacted with all the flexibility that it has to schedule meetings every single week between now and the special town meeting. But I would have to offer to you that that second important element of due diligence, I think has been radically cut short.
Do you
And
think?
I think it's unfortunate because I think it places at risk perhaps some of our fellow citizens not fully understanding all of the good work that has been done. And in fact, we had that conversation with the applicant. And the applicant agreed that that has created a risk. So just from my perspective, I think your very good question about due diligence is in two parts. And from my perspective, good due diligence on drafting, but unfortunately, a dramatic reduction in the opportunity to really outreach with the town.
Do you think this bill would look drastically different if you had that additional time that you talk about?
Would the draft look different?
Sure.
That was not the point I was trying to make. I was trying to say that if we had the time from now until the normal town meeting, I'm confident that there'd be a much better understanding among our fellow citizens of what's involved, and that we're really handicapped given the short amount of time between now and the special town meeting.
I get it.
The comment that Mr. Lynch made in the beginning a little bit of is that, and I keep on coming back to this, is a technical bylaw. I think this addresses most of the issues of large-scale commercial marijuana, but I think Mr. Boynton's point is the public policy issue of, do you want to have a large-scale facility like this, and what are the pros and cons and pluses and minuses from a broader perspective than just pure, simple zoning, is the part that's been compressed as a result of this. Because
So it's the education of residents to make an informed decision.
Understanding what the benefit impacts are going to be, potentially what are impacts on real estate values, things of that nature. You're not going to have as robust discussion of that. And that is the part of it that really is up to people themselves to make their decision on.
And our discussion was that having the full period of time that at least I expected we would have until the regular town meeting, and I think perhaps others expected, that when we talked about this at prior meetings, we made the point, that could be very helpful to both those people who are advocates and for that group of residents who have concerns.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your sentiment. I think from what I'm getting, and I appreciate that it's helpful, because when I go back to town meeting, again, I hate to be repetitive, but the unfavorable action taken at town meeting, at least what I gathered at a town meeting, was in one part that there wasn't the ability to gather the information and to put together enough information to make an informed, for your board to make an informed decision on the zoning bylaw. Now, what I'm getting from you, Mr. Boynton, I can certainly appreciate that. As an involved citizen myself, the compressed time that not only puts on you, but it puts on us as citizens, I can appreciate that. I'd like to move off on that. I appreciate that, because again, I think one of the aspects on the unfavorable was that we didn't have the 6 months of process to take a look at the information, or at least you didn't. The other question or concern raised at town meeting was the water usage in the draining of the lake. Has that been answered to your satisfaction?
Well, this gets a little bit at some of the comments that other members of the board have made, is that technically there hasn't been an application by anybody for anything. So the process is you have to have a bylaw first. But one of the reasons why we talked to the applicant is that we wanted to understand how one would address those large, complex issues. And therefore, if you really look into the details of this bylaw, there's sections where you have to explicitly address water use in this much detail, and it lays it out. And we have the right to hire a consultant to monitor that use and so forth, so that we feel that when they come in with a formal application, we will be able to address that issue of water use appropriately.
Okay.
So just I totally agree with John. Basically, what it's saying is that our bylaw doesn't say whether their water use is appropriate or not appropriate. That's for if the bylaw passes and they apply for a special permit, that's when we
And that's for
address it.
down the road consideration.
Well, we have enough information now to create the bylaw so that we can be strict enough and get enough information that we can make an informed decision if we come to that point.
Okay.
So we have enough information to be able to put something together that we can make a decision later on, if that makes sense.
I'd also like to go back to your due diligence, because I think there's actually a third element And I think it's something that received a fair amount of discussion on the board leading up to now, and that is we're in a bit of a dilemma with trying to do good due diligence, right?
Well, I
But
think the due diligence,
also not yet having the input from the Cannabis Commission or the rules and regulations that will be promulgated by the Commonwealth. And that's something that this board has sort of debated throughout the process. So I think an argument could also be made, just to respond to your due diligence question, that if there's any area where that remains a question, at least for me, one, as I've told you, was the opportunity to educate the residents. I think we've fallen short there. And the second is, we're doing this before we know what the rules are. And that's something that we've struggled with here, and it remains a dilemma. And I think it goes to the due diligence.
okay, I appreciate that. But again, the question that's helpful. Again, it goes back to, I'm trying to, as a resident, make an informed decision, and when I go back, I can take a town meeting into 4 categories. The first was the due diligence, the second was the water, the third is an odor. I guess, Mr. Goldberg, that it would be the same situation on the odor mitigation. Here, we're looking at land use. When they come with, or when somebody comes with a special permit, it would then be at that situation that we would get clarity on purification or what odor limits might be. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, the bylaw says that, one, we can get a peer review to study their application, that they have to provide an odor plan, mitigation plan, that we can review that, and then that if it's acceptable to the board, then they'd also have to live up to that as part of the conditions. So yes, I think it's addressed in the bylaw, and any specific plan, although we've heard what we think it would be, any specific plan would be addressed at the special permit stage.
Okay, thank you. And
I'd also add to that we've asked many questions along the lines about the water, about odor, about electricity, about all of those issues, and we've put in what we think will encourage and require best practices of folks, of anybody who comes and seeks a special permit. But what I encourage people to do who are interested in the specific concerns about the specific project is to learn more about the actual project, because they did come to us and provide a lot of information about what they anticipate doing and what they anticipate showing to us if the zoning passes and they are applying for a special permit. They've told us here at board meetings before that they anticipate having open houses and encourage residents to come. And they did provide us during our open meetings a lot of information specifically on the water use at the site, on how they plan to control for odors. And it was very educational for me, both as a citizen and being on the planning board, in terms of how to craft this. But so I would encourage you that if those are issues that you're concerned about, or anybody's concerned about, that they look into them a little bit more and potentially go to one of those open houses if they are happening.
Okay. Suffice to say, all the work that you've done over the last 6 months has put protections in this bill, in this article, in this warrant, in this bylaw. I believe it's a bylaw, right?
Yes.
Thank you. All that work that has taken place over the last 6 months have put protections in place in this bylaw for the town for all those types of categories,
Exactly.
among others.
And what I would describe it as, we specifically, in the bylaw, if you look at it, we specifically call out the areas that were of most concern to residents and to us as a planning board, such as odor control, electricity, water consumption, how security is going to be in the building if it has a large-scale cultivation center, issues like that. And we specifically provide that a planning board who's going to review a special permit for such a business has the ability to hire an outside consultant who is actually already smart about these things and tell us what they think about the plan, right? And so there's that ability, and then the standard that we've set in there, and we've had a lot of discussion about that among ourselves on the board. What we've tried to do is craft it in a way that it holds any applicant to the highest best practices and sort of whatever the industry standard is of the moment, or whatever the best practices are of the moment. So what we have heard over the past few months might be the best practices right now, but if in 6 months down the road there's a newer, better way to do things, we will have the ability to bring in an expert and tell us, that might have been good a year ago, now you should do this, now you should require this. So that is all, we've tried to build all of that into this bylaw.
Okay,
So I
great.
just would comment on the best practices. I think I'm pleased with what the board did with embedding best practices, but the reason we did that is because unlike, for example, fire code, where we could cite a standard,
You don't have that
in
here.
the case of major facilities cultivating, producing, production, there are no standards that we could base the bylaw in. And so our best alternative was best practices. And are best practices good? They are, and I'm happy to see those. But I think it needs to be understood that in this case, the best practices are in there because we are moving ahead of any established standards that we would otherwise have been able to put in the bylaw.
Okay, but the protections have, to the best of your ability, the protections have been put in. Thank you. I mentioned there were four. The last objection at town meeting, if, you know, I don't think any of us in the room can change. It was, you know, whether you like marijuana or not. If that's a planning board thing, then I wish you well. But I do want to thank you, as well as the Board of Selectmen, for the amount of work that you've put into this. And I really appreciate, you know, your comments, Mr. Boynton, on the compressed schedule, your willingness to have meetings, I believe, the next 3 weeks, as well as the town meeting. So I want to thank you guys for the hard work that you've done, the consideration that you've put in, and the protections that you've put in for the town if it passes. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Dan Leary, 26 Andover Street. I'm part of the development team. I just wanted to make two comments to follow up to some things that were stated. The first is that every Wednesday evening until town meeting, the development team will be hosting a site walk, open house at the property, and we invite everyone in town to come and join us. It's going to be 6:30 to 8:30 at the front. If you walk in the front, we're going to meet up on the manufacturing floor, much like we did. You'll pull into the front parking lot. You'll see the signs to direct you to where to go. But what we'll be doing is offering a chance to meet the development team, the key team that's putting the project together, ask the questions, meet the experts, meet some of the people that helped design the facility. We'll be answering questions and having an extended discussion. But it really will give you a chance to see the scope of the project and understand the vision, what we're trying to do there.
So this is tomorrow night? The first one's tomorrow?
First one's tomorrow night at 6:30. Please come. And then again, every Wednesday at 6:30 until town meeting. My second comment was just for awareness. In parallel with the process you've had here with the planning board, we're working towards an objective of achieving a host community agreement with North Andover, with the town of North Andover. That's a process that it sits with the Board of Selectmen. In order to get to that process, we took steps, and we were advised to take steps to prove that the project is real. And I just wanted to make everyone aware, because you might not be aware, I don't think we've even discussed it in front of the board, so the Technical Review Committee is a process where the town departments review projects sort of prior to getting teed up to coming in for permitting. What we've done is put together a request for a Technical Review Committee, and we've had at least one meeting, but we've put together almost 500 pages of technical documents, engineering documents, that outline everything from, first of all, the site plan, the architectural drawings, how we're going to take this 1.1 million square foot building that used to make telephones and turn it into a cultivation space, and talk about everything related to egress and fire code and things like that. We've put together weeks of testing on the water to make sure that as we're extracting water from the site, that it's the quality water we need, but also that it's not going to impact any watershed resources, and that's about a 120-page report that's part of this. We've put together a security plan that outlines every aspect of the project and meets the state requirements. We put together an odor mitigation plan that likewise, it has some details to be filled in as we do the final build-out proposal. But all of these documents are, have been turned into the town over the last few months. And we've just started to have a chance to review them with the town departments. And maybe most notably is that we've actually already engaged a couple of peer reviews. They're working for the town at our expense, but they're working, for example, for the
I'm going to stop you there for a quick second, because that could be misleading. We pick our peer review, so you could say you have whatever peer review you have, but then don't imply publicly that that's part of the approval process for this thing, for anything having to do with the planning board at all, because I think if you're gonna end up that, you're being really disingenuous.
And I will add, that was made, you know.
I
that
mean,
was
I think
spoken
that's
to.
actually bordering on outrageous, if you want to know the truth.
So that was spoken to at the beginning of the TRC meeting, that
Yeah.
it was not at all consistent with what work is being done here. And I will add that it was really a 30,000-foot look for TRC meeting in terms of any type of comment by individual departments. So it
Sure.
was an introduction to the project, and primarily building and fire comment was added, but, so.
Right, it's not suggested to be a approval in any way, but to understand that in order to come back into the town to pursue the host community agreement, that there is a process, there is a lot of work being done. The project is very real, and we appreciate the town's support and understanding this project with us. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, go ahead.
It's a very quick question. My name is James Pertapabs, I live on Blue Ridge Road. This site used to house over 10,000 Lucent employees. They work 24 hours a day, around the clock. Their electric bill is probably $1 million a month. I'm wondering if, as you go through this project, have you done any parallels as far as what kind of resources Lucent used when they were doing manufacturing versus what kind of resources are going to be in the bylaws as your parameters? Because I assume that we can support what Lucent was doing.
Guys, do you want to take that, Ethan?
Well, it's not really, I mean, I don't know if it's more of a question for the applicant in terms of what they're going to use. I think that's more for them. It's not addressed in the bylaw. We did have discussions about whether or not we wanted to have maximum square footage or things like that in the bylaw. We decided that that would be more appropriate to decide on a special permit basis. The minimum requirements for a site are the same that are required in that particular zoning district right now. So the minimum sizes have to be the same as that are right there now. But if your question really is how many people are going to be working there and how much electricity they're going to use as compared to Lucent, I know we had asked that question and it was discussed before, but I actually think that's more of the applicant required.
I might have misunderstood the bylaw.
I can respond to that a little bit, because one of the things that is in the bylaw is that any application for a special permit for marijuana use will be treated as a new use. So each use that comes in is going to be treated completely new and have to comply with the regulations that are in place at the time. So there isn't an ability to come in with an old use under Lucent with those resources and ask for the same review.
That sounds totally appropriate. I guess my question was more along the lines of, it seems like there's a lot of concern around what the bylaws allow for usage and monitoring the lake and the water use, electric use. And that's why I was thinking, well, Lucent had been there for years with certainly a much larger workforce working 24 hours a day. So it seemed like if that could be supported, then it seems from a infrastructure perspective, this would be supported.
Fair enough.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening. Bruce Travers, Blue Ridge Road. So not to get melodramatic, but I do want to point out, I want to thank the board members for their time and all the volunteer time that they put in for this. And the newest board member, you know, be careful what you wish for, you know. But on a point to us, look at the room. The room's completely full. We've got some college kids here, some high school kids here. A perfect lesson in civics, probably a lot cheaper than what some of them going to school, too. But on the matter at hand, I just want to point out a couple simple points. They've been touched on in varying levels. by some of the other speakers. But I want to remind the town, let's not have a rush to act. It's been brought up, it's been mentioned over and over. The Cannabis Commission hasn't come up with what's going to happen yet. Recreational marijuana was passed in that ballot in 2016. The Commonwealth chose not to initiate any action in regards to retail marijuana distribution until July of this year, and that's not happened yet, obviously. I think everybody has taken a wait and hold approach to see what this all means. I think it's uncharted territories. Granted, Colorado and Washington State have been playing with this for a couple of years. I think we as a town have to think about, to your point, sir, is this an appropriate use of land, a land use matter, a zoning matter for the town of North Andover? Personally, I don't believe it is. I think that if this does work out, the Commonwealth of Mass comes up with, the Cannabis Commission comes up with rules, regulations, uses, non-uses, appropriate revenue streams, and appropriate manufacturing systems, and it's regulated, it's controlled, and it's taxed, and it's understood, I think North Andover could redress it in the future, once we know what it is. Right now, we don't know what it is. I'll remind everybody, just last week, the U.S. Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, came out with a position paper on marijuana, the legal recreational use of marijuana in the country. Be mindful, it's still against federal law. Although the states are regulating it and legalizing it for recreational use, it's still against federal law. Both Colorado and Washington State are having troubles with that, the revenue streams. Banking regulations are having a big problem with how to deal with the revenue streams from what is still an illegal asset. And again, I don't want to digress and get into a whole big thing about that, regulation and banking commissions and bank secrecy laws and acts and whatnot, and money laundering. But those are all some of the speed bumps that I think the Commonwealth recognized early on, and that's why nothing's really rolled out yet. I think the pieces will settle into place over time. If it's going to settle down and be reasonable and understood and managed and controlled, there's no reason North Andover can't jump on after the train is moving. Now, people will say, well, great correlation. The train's already left the station. We missed it. I don't think we're going to miss it. I would encourage the folks to take up that offer and go take a look at that site. 1 million square feet. $1,600 good landing is a huge facility. I think it'll be a bit awe-inspiring to see how massive and what the potential is, what this place could do in there if they actually went out with a full plan of cultivation in there. It is, it's one of the largest buildings probably in this area of the state, certainly. What I'm getting at is, if it's going to come about, and other communities are going to be the first ones to try it, let's see what happens. I don't think North Andover has to be on the cutting edge of trying out something, and something on this scale. Medical marijuana, we have medical marijuana bylaws in town. To your point, what's the difference, whether it's being grown for medical use or recreational use? Well, you can compare apples and oranges, there's all kinds of correlations and the like you can draw, but we're all used to seeing scratch tickets. Every shop has scratch tickets. Nobody necessarily wants a casino going in there either. So there is some use in cause and effect on what the actual product is, not just the land use or zoning matter. I would encourage the planning board and the members thereof to be patient. Let's see how it unfolds. The first recreational shop has not opened its doors yet. Again, I'll reiterate, it's scheduled for this summer. Let's see what happens with that. If this is going to be a viable business and it's not going to be a big problem and it's going to work out as a lot of folks that are supporting it suggest, there's always time. We can always redress the matter at a later date. If this particular development authority, this particular development project team finds suitable accommodations elsewhere, if it's going to be as wonderful as it is, some other team will maybe approach us in the future, and we can always say yes then. That's it,
Okay.
short and simple.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Comments. Anybody else?
Frank Reganisi, 1939 Great Pond Road. I wasn't born in North Andover. However, I've been here almost 33 years, and I'd like to bring to your attention just a couple of things. This is from the Massachusetts Municipal Association, and it's entitled The Marijuana Law, What Cities and Towns Need to Know. And it says, original law stipulated that any city or town with an area previously zoned for medical marijuana could not prohibit recreational marijuana from being sold in the same zone. However, the reworked law removes that section and simply says that a city or town may not prohibit an existing medical facility from converting if it is approved by the state. And approval by the state is not going to be a really hard thing to get. And then let me read you another section here. Communities where voters rejected question 4 may ban recreational marijuana business through their standard ordinance or by bylaw process until December 31st, 2019. This process will apply to the 91 communities where question 4 did not pass. That's North Andover. We're one of the 91 communities. I am very concerned about the fact, and this last gentleman that spoke alluded to that fact, why are we rushing into this thing? Why is the petitioner pushing so hard that we have to, the planning board has to have 3 meetings by the end of this month? I mean, this is unheard of. You should be operating at your own discretion. You should be telling people when the meetings are going to be scheduled. They shouldn't be telling you.
Well, the reason why we're doing this is under state law, individuals have the right to put forth a petition to call for a special town meeting, which they did, and under law it has to be held within 45 days from that point in time. So the answer is we do have no choice because there was a request for a special town meeting. That's why we're here now, not at the regular town meeting.
Yes, we're going to have a special town meeting January 30th, and it's going to cost the town of North Andover up to $18,000, which wasn't budgeted in last year's budget. This is going to be an out-of-pocket expense for the town. And it's just, I've been here, like I said, going on 33 years. In that time, I've seen, look around. You've seen an old building that's been all rehabbed, and we have a beautiful town hall. We have a police station that was done the same way. It was an old building taken over, and they fixed it up to be a very, very good-looking, very fine, functional police station. They built a new fire station right up the street from where I live. They built a new high school. These are only some of the things that have happened in North Andover since I've lived here. We did this all without tax, without marijuana money. Now the people are saying, well, gee, we're gonna give the town so much money. This is all figures they're just giving you. These are all unsubstantiated. Once we make this change, and by the way, let me interject, you guys must have worked your butt off, and that has to be appreciated by the town, but all I'm saying is we rushed through it, and there's no need to rush through it. This is the biggest thing that has come to this town since I've lived here, and I'm sure it's probably the biggest thing that's come to this town since you guys have lived here. Mr. Goldberg, has it been the biggest thing that's happened in this town since you've lived here?
I think it's a rhetorical question. I get your point. Yeah, I mean,
in any event, we did it in this town with professionalism, with the people that ran our offices, our department heads, committees like yourself. That's how this was done. And we didn't have to be dependent on marijuana money. Now what's going on, I just came from a meeting today. I'm a retired assessor. I just came from a meeting today, Assessors Association meeting, and basically, as a joke, people came up to me, gee, you're going to be the biggest cultivators in the country. I says, no, in the world. And this is basically what North Andover is going to be known for. It's not going to be known for being a professional town with a good school system and professional people that work in the office and department heads. It's going to be known as the biggest cultivator of marijuana. And last night at the selectmen's meeting, I was quite surprised because two women came up and they spoke. And you know what they said? They said, if we'd have known that we were going to be cultivating marijuana, we wouldn't have moved to this town. We have children that are going through the school town. We wouldn't have moved into this town. And that's basically what's going to happen when this law, if this law passes at town meeting.
Good. If I may, I think I would characterize your points as again, the issue of there's not sufficient time, more due diligence, and that you are opposed to the large-scale cultivation use in town, and I think further that it doesn't provide the benefits that you believe have been proposed. Is that a fair characterization of your position?
I just believe we're rushing through this thing, and I think that where it's such a big thing, of enormous magnitude, I think we should take more time to really go through this thing.
Okay.
I think the citizens should be more informed, which the first speaker said he
I think we're all trying our best to get as much of a message out there as possible.
I think there's confusion out there, and the people still don't understand what it's all about. I mean, there's a big push by the applicant, and he's hired lobbyists. He's spending all kinds of money, but basically the people that are opposed to this thing are just private citizens like myself that are against this thing, and we don't have money behind us. We're just doing this on our
I don't want to go
own.
down that path because that's really well out of scope for.
I have one other thing that I want to ask you. Basically, the original plan called for $300 per day fine, and it's been reduced to $200. That should have been increased to $500. Why was it decreased to $200?
Well, $300 is the limit, right?
Yeah,
It's the maximum.
so I'm actually not aware of that change. So the change, you're saying that the change was from 3 to
I didn't think we
200?
changed it. I thought
Yeah, I
we
don't
put the
think we did. It's-
statutory
it's cons-
maximum.
It
Yeah.
is, it's consistent with the statute.
It is still 300?
Yeah.
I thought I saw something
Yeah.
in the draft that said 200.
It's 300 and the regulations from, so that's under our, special permit. The draft regulations which haven't been enacted yet by the Cannabis Control Commission also include fines as well as the ability to shut down facilities that don't follow the guidelines. So we're limited a little bit in what we can do in terms of fining. We do have other powers through the town, but there's also the state powers as well.
So I would like to elaborate on that a little bit. The board did discuss for some time the question of fines for non-compliance, and $300 is the maximum. We did not have the ability to include a larger fine, and the board discussed that $300 a day for a very large commercial entity would not be compelling. But as my colleague just noted, as part of the board's discussion, we noted that in addition to the fine, there would be the ability to shut down operations. Is that correct?
That's the point. And there are other avenues, injunctive relief that we could seek if there were issues, nuisances that needed to be dealt with.
And we also require a bond, a performance bond, under the zoning bylaw that can be tapped into if there's a violation to cure any violations. So actually, throughout the process, we have stepped up the remedies available to the town to cure any violations.
And with this bond, if there is a violation and the monies are drawn from that bond, will they have to replenish the bond?
Well, presumably I don't believe that's in there, but by that would be if a special permit requires a performance bond, then that performance bond would have to be maintained for as long as that establishment existed. So yes, in effect, it would.
So they would. I guess I thank you very much, but I really wish you'd look at this with an open mind and study the impact it's going to have on a nice community like North Andover. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you all for participating and showing up. I think it's great that people are involved and getting informed. My name is Dan DiFilippo. I live at 47 Sutton Hill Road. I've been in North Andover about 10 years. I'm raising a young family here. I plan on being here for at least 33 years. I would want everyone to think about the impact that this would have on other businesses in the town. And in your regard, in terms of not rushing, this site has been underutilized for a long time. So I would agree, I would say that we're not rushing, that we've spent a long time with an empty building. And what I mean by impact on other businesses, my grandmother and my aunts and a few of my neighbors who live over here at Sutton Pond, a lot of these people worked at Lucent. And like you were saying, 10,000 people, or whatever the number was, 24 hours a day. My understanding is there'll be 2,000 new jobs here, if not a little more. Those are haircuts, those are lunches, those are other businesses benefiting from 2,500 new people working in the area. And if I'm wrong, please correct me, but I don't believe this project is an inappropriate use of the land, because I don't believe they're trying to sell any marijuana there to public people. So this isn't going to be a dispensary. This is a medical research facility. They're researching medicine for people who are dying of cancer.
Can I just make one comment about that? Is that the only requirement in our bylaw that requires them to do any research is that there's a ratio of 15% of the total capacity as maximum. So when you say it's a research facility, it's predominantly a cultivation facility. I think you're being, frankly, not correct, and you're being misleading.
I'll add the word
by
cultivation.
saying that is.
I don't, my intention, and that's not what I'm doing.
Yeah.
It is a cultivation center, but you need to cultivate to research.
That
this
is
isn't
correct.
something you can do without cultivating. It's like cultivating flowers, and they bring in the best people from the world in cultivation. This is not Colorado, open up a shop, and all the potheads are coming in. I would not be for that. I have children, and I don't think kids should be exposed to it. Now, what the country does with their laws, that's up to us people. But what I will say is that it will impact positively. These are professional people. These are doctors, these are horticulturists, these are accountants, these are lawyers, these are professional people. This is not, hey, come get the weed. We've learned from other states the mistakes that they have made, and we're taking our unique space to this town. This is an asset that's gone underutilized for so long. Not only the town, the state, and if you do it right, with the due diligence and with information to the town, so people aren't misinformed, including myself. I don't want to be misinformed. There's a lot of fake news out there. So it's up to us citizens to sift through what's real and what's not on both sides. Well, that's your opinion, sir.
Okay, I don't want to get into a
so my point is,
counterpoint here.
I'm here to support it. I live in the community. I have young children in the schools. And I don't like the language sometimes when it gets construed over to what we're not talking about. Here we're talking about land use and the purpose, which is not retail marijuana.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough, thank you. If I could solicit any other views first, I will give you a chance to speak again, but I'd like to get some other perspectives in first if anybody else would like to speak. Hearing nobody else, you're welcome back to the floor, but keep it brief because, yeah.
I'll keep it brief. Basically, he's talking about Colorado and the selling of the selling of recreational marijuana. Apparently, you didn't hear what I read, and basically it says here, the reworked law that section that section and simply says that says that a city or town may not prohibit an existing medical facility from converting. And I said that twice initially when I read this. So yeah, they're gonna open up and they're gonna sell it as, they're gonna say, well, we're cultivating medical marijuana. However, they have the option to convert. And once this is passed, they could do anything they want out there. And you know what? We can't do a damn thing about it. So keep that in mind. And basically all I've heard about this building going up is, gee, there's a big building up there and this will give it a use. And I say that the owner that bought this building, Mr. Goldstein, I believe his name is, didn't market the building properly the first time after he bought it at a distressed sale for almost $14 million. Otherwise, we would be seeing some real nice stuff in there. We were promised so many things out there. We were promised condos. We were promised residential, commercial. We were promised a train station. You don't see any of that. Now, basically, what's going to happen is, and I'll close, we're talking about all the jobs that we're going to bring in, and people are going to come in this town to get haircuts and stuff like that. The people he's going to hire are going to be people from Lawrence, from Haverhill, from Methuen, from Andover. Some people from North Andover. There is no guarantee that all the...
I get to use the gavel.
I'm not putting down anyone.
Wrong path to go down. Yeah, come on. You got to sit down. You got to sit down.
Attorney Rosen, just a point of clarification, and I'll ask Attorney Egan as well. I believe that the MMA memo that was cited...
Please, one conversation?
No, that's fine. Is not applicable law at this point. I don't believe there's a right to convert, but even if there were, it wouldn't be applicable to this particular site because this site is not going to have any retail establishment or any retail operations. They're not going to be selling from the site medical or recreational, so there wouldn't even be a medical site to convert to a recreational site. So I do think that's
a covenant to that effect anyway.
And it's not an issue for my client. I think that that's exactly, it is not our intention to sell either, so the conversion language that's being quoted, A, I don't believe is applicable law at this point, and B, it wouldn't be applicable to 1600 Osgood Street. So I just wanted that to be clear. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Everybody's been patiently sitting here and waiting. One of the things, since we're going to do this again 2 other times, I certainly encourage any of you to come back again. If you had detailed questions, please do that. You know, there is that offer to actually attend an event at 1600 Osgood, but I'd also ask you to invite other individuals who, you know, may be interested to come to our next meeting, because I think one of our big takeaways from this is that we really need to get the word out a little bit better, and we need to sort of frame the pros and cons a little bit more clearly so everybody understands the implications of everything we're doing. I think that was probably one of the biggest learnings we had tonight. So, yes, Rosemary, go ahead.
There is also a group that will be meeting this Saturday, 1 to 3, at the Senior Center to also educate the people on what many people feel are the cons to this. I do have to make comment on the fact that even last night, when I asked the applicant repeatedly what percentage of the property would be for medical marijuana and research and what percentage would be for recreational, we really never got a clear answer, because 15% for medical research. They have a few parties interested. No one has officially signed up or done a contract of any sort. So we really don't know what part of the medical.
Frankly, there's 2 answers to the question, and both are you're never going to know because the product's fungible is the first thing, so you really can't tell which use it is. And the market's going to dictate whether the applicant goes to one side or the other. It could be 100% retail, 0 medical.
You mean recreational? Yes,
0,
exactly my point. It could be 100% recreational, but it is being it is being advertised to the public through phone messages and flyers in the last go-round, that mainly it's going to be medical research and medical marijuana. So I'm just saying it's disingenuous not to include that there is a very good chance that the majority of that facility will be for recreational. As far as the jobs go, we really don't have an accurate count of, will it be 2,000 jobs or a few hundred jobs? So I think that question also has not been answered. So I think that there's still a lot of unknowns and a lot of misinformation. So I guess I would ask everybody to also take a look at the other side on Saturday from 1 to 3 at the Senior Center here in North Andover.
Thank you. Okay. Any other comments from the board? I maybe wanted to come back to the 15% and the way we've framed it. We don't necessarily have to decide tonight, but I think one of the thoughts that I had is that we are trying to achieve a balanced use, but if the balanced use were just reserved shut-off space that was never used, I'm not sure we've achieved the objective of what we want. So we may want to think of a way to tie the two uses, the research use and the cultivation use, a little bit more tightly, other than just a flat 15%. So I don't know if anybody's had any thoughts about that, about how we might do that, but that's something that I started to think about, again, a little bit more detail than I had before.
It's an interesting question. I think it's hard because you never know, assuming it's tenants or things like that, who's going to be in and when. So it's an interesting question, and whether or not you make it part of the special permit or... Yeah, I'm not sure. It's a tough question because you don't want to be overzealous and say you have to have a certain amount, but maybe as you build out, I'm not sure, but it's I don't know the answer to the question.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to bring it up again because, obviously one of the things I wouldn't want to see is that the space that's reserved for the lab space is used for existing legacy tenants for 2 or 3 years, and then that count, is a way, and it's not used for the proposed use. But at the same time, I know you can't be overly prescriptive and say you're going to have a certain number of square feet because the market may not take off that fast. But what I would hate to have is 1 billion square feet of cultivation space and 5,000 feet of the other with the rest reserved and just empty. That's my point, is how do we achieve a better balance between the two? So.
The only other thing I think we should, I don't know, in terms of, going back to Mr. Lynch's point about coming up with kind of questions in the discussion, I do think that's something that we should frame as a board as part of probably the next, maybe in the next public hearing, come up with ideas, frame them, take input.
Could we have possibly a draft that we look at going into the next?
If someone, yes, I just don't think, I think we should discuss it and come up with it and vote on it. If someone else, if someone else wants to take a shot at that.
What I'm thinking is, why doesn't everybody sketch their notes, maybe just start it as bullet points and give it to Eugene, and you can sort of tabulate them all up, and maybe we can get at least a working draft the next time and finish it up the one following, so.
And can I just go back to the point that you raised before about the 15% of the gross floor area? As the bylaw is drafted right now, that is a condition within the special permit. And it does state, the way it's drafted is it's 15% of the gross floor area dedicated to cultivation for the marijuana research and facility. So when I drafted that, I was contemplating that it would be within that 1 million square feet of cultivation. But I think that may be my error in my understanding of what the board was intending. So if the board is intending actually that it's a 15% of the office space has to be reserved,
no,
which is different than the cultivation.
No, it's 15%. I mean,
so that's something that I think it should be resolved.
You could do it 15% of the cultivation space or 15% of the total space.
Total gross floor area.
You know, and it
So
might
that-
be easier to do it as a percentage of the cultivation because that is a known thing. But I mean, we could play around with that.
Yeah, we do need to think, I
formula,
just wanted
too.
to
Yeah.
make sure that you thought about that as
Yeah.
whether you're thinking of the gross floor area or the cultivation facility.
Yeah,
So that, I think that's an
yeah.
important thing, because I think we should circle back to that, because that does need to be tightened up a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
I
Yes.
have one more question, Mr. Science. The more you talked about this sub-district B, how is this not spot zoning? It only applies to one parcel. I'll let
Well,
you-
I'll leave it to town council about, you know, spot zoning's in the eye of the beholder in many cases. I mean, I don't mean to be flip,
Well,
but that's,
let town
you know.
council answer that question, please.
So spot zoning normally comes up as an issue as to whether you're trying to limit somebody from using the property in a certain way. And that's when the issue typically comes up, and that's when a court would make a determination that something could be spot zoning if it was singled out for something in a more restrictive manner than other parcels. And in most instances, something like this, what the courts look for if it's a spot zoning is whether there's a legislative process that is undertaken, whether there's considered deliberations regarding the issues in creating a district. And I am extremely confident that in this instance, a court would not find that this was spot zoning.
But you're saying it's,
I was just gonna say also, it seems that, at least from the what you're talking about in terms of one area, it's limiting and saying in B, you can't have the dispensing aspect, which is what I think, right, so.
it is more limiting.
Right, so I think if anyone could complain, that would be the owners, which they haven't. But generally, spot zoning is not found when there's a public benefit, and I think that there would be the argument, at least of people in favor of Article 2, that is a public benefit not to have the dispensing aspect.
Okay, but so it's not clear, because it is more limiting. You're also requiring this particular parcel to have 15% research, where none of the other parcels in the MMOD are required that. This parcel has a lot more requirements than other parcels, so it is more restrictive. So it does seem like it applies to spot zoning and probably a subject of appeal.
But, I would disagree with that, because I
Okay.
do think what this subdistrict B is doing is allowing a particular use that is distinct. And really what the courts really do look at is to whether there is a plan as a plan and a deliberation in terms of drafting a bylaw and looking at the different uses. And here what we've done is we've said we're going to have a marijuana overlay district, and it's appropriate. Certain uses are appropriate in certain districts within this marijuana overlay district, and therefore it wouldn't be considered spot zoning.
Okay. Has that been run by the Attorney General? Because I know the warrant typically goes, after it's voted on, it goes to the Attorney General after the fact. And I know when the 40 hours passed, there was a bunch of commentary that it didn't comply. There was, in 2007, there was about 10 pages of comments from the Attorney General. So have you had a chance to run this warrant article by them for compliance? Because it is so complex. It is such a short timeline, and every warrant article on zoning actually has had follow-up comments.
No, we haven't. We have not run this by the Attorney General's office.
I would make a recommendation that we try to do that, because, like I said, every warrant article I think we've ever had on zoning that was more than a typographical change, they've had significant comments. Even the downtown overlay that we spent 6 months on with public hearings when we did redid that one, so.
Fair enough. Okay, well, let's see, at this point, I would entertain a motion to adjourn, unless we have further business to discuss.
So a motion to adjourn until,
For a motion to continue.
a motion to continue until January 16th at
Yes,
7 o'clock
Yeah,
here. So I would make a motion to continue this public hearing on Articles 2, 4, and 5.
well, let's do that first, continue the public hearing on that.
Yes, so-
Will somebody second that motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
So a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Yeah.
I'd make that motion.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great, thank you.